What if I told you that most people don't truly care about your problems, not because they're heartless, but because they're drowning in their own? You keep speaking your pain, hoping someone will save you, but what if the only person truly capable of healing you is staring back in the mirror? In the modern world, communication has become constant and overwhelming. People are always connected, always talking, always expressing, often about their struggles, frustrations, and emotional difficulties. This culture of oversharing is seen as a form of vulnerability, even strength. But when we examine it more deeply, especially through the lens of inner psychology, it becomes clear that talking endlessly about one's problems does not necessarily lead to healing. It can, in fact, become a form of escape, a way to avoid the hard, silent work of self-confrontation. Emotional expression, when done without reflection or inner awareness, becomes circular. You talk, feel temporary relief, then repeat the same complaints again. The problem doesn't change, the pain doesn't dissolve. What actually happens is that the expression becomes a habit, a self-soothing behavior that never reaches the root of the issue. This cycle can be soothing to the ego because it gets attention and affirmation, but it never transforms the soul. True healing demands more than release. It demands inquiry, discipline, and silence. Not all speech is medicine. Some speech is distraction. When a person continually externalizes their suffering, they unconsciously create a psychological identity around being wounded. The repeated telling of the story reinforces a version of the self that is defined by its wounds rather than its strength. It becomes easy to fall into the trap of believing that being heard is the same as being healed. But healing doesn't happen through the ears of others. It happens through the eyes you turn inward. When you are willing to sit with discomfort long enough to understand where it comes from, why it returns, and what you've been avoiding in yourself. Repeatedly sharing your problems without this inner observation leads to emotional stagnation. The same pain recycles because the speaker is avoiding responsibility for their own transformation. The world cannot carry the weight you refuse to hold yourself. There is also an important energetic truth at play. Words carry weight. Every time you speak your suffering into existence, you reinforce its reality in your body and mind. The nervous system listens. The subconscious absorbs the repetition. What is constantly spoken becomes solid, embedded, more difficult to shift. In this sense, words are not just communication tools, they are instruments of creation. Speaking unconsciously can reinforce your prison, while silence used with awareness can become the doorway to your liberation. It is not the telling of your story that heals. It is the changing of your relationship with that story. Oversharing, especially when it is impulsive and emotionally charged, keeps the old patterns alive. You are not releasing the pain, you are keeping it fresh, raw, rehearsed. When people say they feel better after venting, the relief is often superficial and temporary. Like a pressure valve opened briefly, it reduces discomfort without resolving the inner tension. Eventually, the pressure returns, the pain resurfaces, the cycle begins again. This shows that the talking was not transformative, only relieving. True change comes not from the emotional release alone, but from deep self-inquiry. And this level of work is rarely done in public or through constant conversation. It happens in solitude, in reflection, in the hard work of sitting with one's own contradictions. In this light silence is not repression, it is refinement. It forces you to observe what you usually distract yourself from. It brings awareness to the emotional loops you've normalized. It gives you the opportunity to listen, not to others, but to your own inner world. And in that space, you can begin to trace the patterns, question the narratives. Every individual moves through life carrying an invisible burden. These burdens differ in shape and weight. Some carry the remnants of childhood wounds, others the anxiety of an uncertain future, many the heartbreak of personal failures or betrayals. While outwardly people may smile, joke, work, or even seem indifferent, their inner world is often filled with silent turmoil. This is one of the great illusions of modern human interaction, the belief that others are free enough, light enough, or emotionally available enough to deeply care for your pain. The reality is much harsher. Most people are not truly present in your experience because they are drowning in their own. Behind the polite nods and occasional words of sympathy, there often lies emotional exhaustion, mental distraction, or internal battles that are far from resolved. It's not that people are unkind. It's that they are already saturated with their own suffering, which limits their capacity to hold space for yours. When someone shares a deep emotional wound, they expect empathy. But empathy, in its truest form, requires attention, energy, and presence. These are rare commodities in a world obsessed with speed, distraction, and personal survival. People may respond to your problems with familiar phrases, nods, or fleeting concern, but their minds may already be elsewhere, thinking about their bills, their relationships, their health, their fears. Even the most well-meaning friends and loved ones are often caught in their own psychological loops, unable to offer more than surface-level comfort. There is a fundamental loneliness in this truth, the realization that, for the most part, you must carry your suffering alone, because everyone else is carrying theirs too. This is not a cynical view of humanity, it is an honest one. The human condition is filled with struggle, and no one escapes it. Everyone, in some way, is trying to make sense of their inner chaos while appearing functional to the outside world. When you approach someone with the expectation that they will deeply care, fix, or even fully understand your emotional pain, you risk disappointment, not because they are heartless, but because they are overwhelmed. Their emotional bandwidth is limited, and much of it is already taken up by their own unresolved wounds. Most of the time, when you speak about your suffering, the listener is filtering your words through their own lens. They might compare your story to theirs, judge it unconsciously, or divert the conversation back to themselves, not out of malice. But instinct projection is one of the most subtle yet powerful psychological behaviors in human interaction. When someone repeatedly talks about their problems, especially in emotionally charged ways, they often believe they are merely expressing their truth, but beneath that expression lies a deeper psychological mechanism at work, the act of projecting unexamined inner conflicts onto others. Rather than confronting the discomfort within, the person unconsciously externalizes it, hoping that someone else will carry it, fix it, or affirm it. This gives temporary relief, but it does not resolve the underlying wound. The more the person talks, the more they begin to mistake expression for understanding. They think that by speaking about their problem, they are processing it, but in many cases they are simply keeping it alive by giving it attention and emotional energy without insight. What they avoid inwardly, they try to manage outwardly. The more it is projected, the more it appears to be a problem that exists outside of themselves, when in reality it originates from within. Every time a person brings up the same emotional wound in conversation, be it a betrayal, failure, disappointment, or fear, without deeper reflection, they are often projecting a part of their psyche they have not yet integrated. This projection turns the world into a stage for their unresolved narrative. Other people then unknowingly become actors in a play that was written by someone else's unconscious. The individual may begin to feel that no one understands them, or that the world is full of indifferent, uncaring people. But in truth, what they are experiencing is their own internal disconnection reflected back at them. They are not speaking to be understood. They are speaking to avoid understanding themselves. It is easier to seek attention or sympathy than it is to sit in stillness and confront the source of one's pain. Projection thrives in this avoidance. Moreover, this habit of emotional projection can create distorted relationships. When someone projects their inner wounds outwardly, they often misinterpret other people's reactions. A lack of immediate empathy may be seen as rejection. A neutral response may be taken as an insult. Silence may feel like abandonment. But these responses are not always signs of external failure. They are reflections of an internal world that has become hypersensitive, defensive, or wounded. The projected emotion warps perception. Conversations become filtered through a lens of pain, and reality becomes difficult to trust. This cycle can isolate the individual further. They begin to believe they are alone, misunderstood, or cursed in some way, not realizing that the isolation is a creation of their own psyche trying to defend itself from deeper truths. What remains hidden behind this constant outward emotional expression is often a deeper fear, the fear of facing one's shadow. The shadow is the part of the psyche that contains everything we deny, reject, or are ashamed of. By projecting emotions outward, we keep the shadow at bay. We avoid acknowledging that the root of the problem may not be other people, the past, or fate, but something unresolved within ourselves. The more we speak about pain without introspection, the more the shadow grows stronger, feeding on the energy we give it through projection. This prevents integration. Healing cannot occur because the individual refuses to look inward. Instead, they seek mirrors that only reflect the surface. Ultimately, every outward complaint carries with it a question that has not yet been asked internally. Why does this situation trigger me so deeply? What part of me feels helpless, unworthy, or unseen? What am I really afraid of beneath this anger, sadness, or frustration? These questions require courage, solitude, and honesty. qualities that projection resists. But without asking them, the person becomes trapped in a cycle where their own unacknowledged emotions shape their reality and relationships over and over again. Healing in its most authentic form is an inward journey. It is not something that happens in the presence of applause, validation, or sympathy. True healing begins when an individual stops seeking external affirmation and turns their gaze inward into the depths of their own psyche. It requires solitude, silence, and radical self-honesty. When a person constantly looks outward for comfort, for someone to listen, for someone to carry even a portion of their burden, they delay the most important conversation, the one they must have with themselves. External support may soothe the surface, but it cannot excavate the hidden roots of pain that lie embedded deep in the unconscious. Others can listen, but they cannot untangle the knot. Only the person who suffers truly knows the complexity of what they carry, and only they can begin to unravel it piece by piece through self-examination. There is a powerful difference between relief and transformation. External validation brings relief. It can temporarily calm the nervous system, make someone feel seen, even loved, but this relief fades. The same issue returns, often stronger and more complex than before. This is because the core problem hasn't been touched, only its symptoms. Transformation, however, requires stillness. It requires that a person sit with their pain long enough to understand it without judgment, that they ask, where did this originate? What patterns does it repeat? What beliefs am I feeding that allow this pain to thrive? These are not questions other people can answer. They are personal inquiries that demand vulnerability, courage, and a willingness to face the parts of the self that have long been ignored. The more one seeks comfort in external ears, the more the soul becomes neglected. This is because true healing is not a matter of comfort but of confrontation. The very act of constantly sharing emotional pain outwardly is, in many cases, an unconscious way of avoiding the discomfort of being alone with oneself. There is a kind of addiction to being heard, to being emotionally rescued, that can become a form of self-abandonment. You begin to rely on others to regulate your emotions rather than developing the capacity to sit with them, understand them, and eventually transform them. This kind of dependency can mask itself as openness, but in truth it often reflects an unwillingness to face the internal darkness without a lifeline. Turning inward is not about isolation or self-punishment. It is about reclaiming responsibility for your own healing. It means acknowledging that no one else has access to the innermost chambers of your pain. No one else can interpret your dreams, decode your patterns, or confront your shadow. This is sacred work, and while guidance may come from books, mentors, therapists, the real effort must be done in the quiet moments, in solitude, in reflection, in honest self-inquiry. This is where the unconscious begins to speak, where symbols emerge from dreams, where hidden wounds make themselves known, not to shame you, but to be integrated. Healing, then, is not a gift others give you. It is a process of remembering your own wholeness and returning to it through inner exploration. There is no shortcut to this process. No amount of venting, complaining, or external sympathy can replace the personal work required. And often, the very act of seeking constant emotional release through others becomes a distraction. It gives the illusion of movement, but often keeps the person stuck in the same emotional loop. Until one dares to pause the noise and turn inward, the wound remains misunderstood and unresolved. The healing that changes you, the kind that leads to lasting peace and clarity, always begins within. Silence is often misunderstood. In a world that equates expression with strength and openness with virtue, choosing silence can be mistaken for repression, weakness, or emotional distance. But there is a profound distinction between silence that suppresses and silence that observes. The former hides, the latter reveals. True silence, the kind that arises from conscious choice, is a powerful psychological tool. It creates space. It slows the rush of reactive emotions. It allows the individual to witness rather than perform, to reflect rather than react. In this space, something remarkable begins to occur. Awareness deepens. The internal landscape, once blurred by constant expression and noise, becomes clearer, more navigable. You begin to see the structure of your suffering, the triggers, the patterns, the stories you keep repeating, not only to others but to yourself. Many people assume that talking about their problems is the only way to understand them. But when done impulsively or habitually, speech becomes a mechanism of avoidance rather than insight. It becomes a tool of distraction. Every time pain arises, it is immediately given away, placed into the hands or ears of another, never fully felt, never fully examined. In contrast, silence holds it. It does not rush to fix or justify. It watches, and in that stillness, Truths begin to surface that would otherwise remain buried under layers of explanation and emotional noise. You begin to see that much of what you believed about your suffering was based on unchallenged assumptions, that the same story you've repeated 100 times is no longer true, if it ever was at all. But such realizations can only occur when the voice falls silent and the inner eye opens. Silence is also a form of strength. It requires discipline to sit with emotions without immediately discharging them. It takes courage to feel deeply without reaching for someone to witness or soothe the pain. This kind of inner containment is not about denying your emotions, but about creating a container strong enough to hold them without collapsing. In doing so, you develop an internal capacity for self-regulation, resilience, and insight. You learn to become your own observer, a skill that is essential for true psychological growth. Through silence, you come to recognize which emotions are yours and which have been inherited or absorbed from others. You notice which stories serve your growth and which keep you trapped in old identities. Additionally, silence alters the relationship between the conscious and unconscious mind. Most of the psyche operates beneath awareness, speaking in symbols, images, and emotions. This language is subtle and easily drowned out by constant verbalization. When you become quiet, you begin to hear it. Dreams become more vivid, intuition sharpens, unconscious material rises to the surface, offering valuable insights into your hidden motivations and unresolved wounds. You start to notice synchronicities, the seemingly random events that carry personal meaning. These inner signals are missed when the mind is always focused outward, always speaking, always seeking a response. But in silence, the unconscious becomes a collaborator in your healing, revealing what you are ready to face. This is why silence, used intentionally, becomes a profound form of therapy. Not the kind that avoids or buries emotion, but the kind that transforms it through awareness. It is a deliberate stepping back from the world's noise to hear what is truly happening within. While others may interpret this as withdrawal or disconnection, it is, in reality, a return to the self, to the forgotten depths of your own being, and in that return, a new relationship with your pain begins to take shape, not one based on resistance or storytelling, but on understanding, integration, and ultimately release. Waiting for others to rescue you from your emotional suffering is one of the most deceptive illusions in the human experience. It is a form of quiet dependence that disguises itself as hope, but it subtly erodes personal power. The belief that someone will come along, a friend, a partner, a therapist, a mentor, and finally understand you so deeply that your pain will dissolve is not just unrealistic, it's psychologically disempowering. While human connection can offer moments of support and guidance, it cannot replace the inner responsibility each individual holds for their own transformation. When a person continually looks outward for emotional salvation, they remain trapped in a cycle of helplessness. They become a character in a story always in need of saving, never realizing they also hold the pen. This mindset delays healing by placing the solution outside of the self, beyond one's reach, and into the hands of others who are often unable or unwilling to carry such a weight. The need to be rescued often arises from early wounds, moments in childhood or youth where emotional needs were unmet, neglected, or dismissed. These experiences can create a psychological blueprint that says, I cannot carry my pain alone. Someone else must. This belief system follows people into adulthood, leading them to form relationships where they unconsciously expect others to fill the void or fix the damage. But no matter how much support is offered, the ache persists. That is because the wound was never external in nature. It originated within, and it must be addressed from within. Relying on others to do that work is not just ineffective, it is a denial of personal agency. And in this denial, the individual becomes more deeply entangled in suffering, mistaking temporary comfort for true healing. Moreover, this expectation of rescue often leads to disappointment and resentment. When others fail to meet the unspoken hope that they will understand, fix, or soothe, the one suffering feels even more isolated. The mind says, no one cares, but the deeper truth is that no one can fully enter the inner labyrinth of another person's psyche. Each person's suffering is uniquely their own, shaped by their experiences, interpretations, and unresolved conflicts. Expecting someone else to navigate that complexity is unfair, both to them and to oneself. Even the most well-meaning person cannot interpret the symbols of your dreams, feel the nuances of your pain, or confront the ghosts that live in your unconscious. That work belongs to you alone, and claiming it is not a burden but a step toward liberation. There is also a hidden fear behind the desire to be rescued, the fear of facing oneself. It's far easier to hope someone else will fix your problems than it is to sit in the discomfort of your own emotions and take full responsibility for them. But avoiding this responsibility only prolongs suffering. The pain does not vanish when shared. It waits patiently to be acknowledged by its true owner. Healing begins the moment one turns inward and says, "This is mine. I must face it, understand it, and learn from it." Only then does pain begin to reveal its purpose, not as a punishment, but as a teacher. And no one else can have that lesson on your behalf. To wait for others to fix your inner world is to delay the process of becoming whole. It is to give away the very power you need to reclaim. While compassion and connection are vital parts of life, they are not substitutes for self-exploration. There comes a point in every journey where one must walk alone, not because others have abandoned you, but because the path forward requires solitude. It requires a turning inward, a confrontation with the self, and the courage to face what you have long feared or denied. That is where the real healing begins. Not with a rescuer, but with the realization that you were never truly powerless. Solitude is often misunderstood in a world that glorifies constant connection, stimulation, and social validation. People fear being alone because they associate it with loneliness, rejection, or inadequacy. But solitude, when embraced intentionally, is not an absence. It is a presence. It is a sacred space where distractions fall away and the true self can emerge without distortion. When you make solitude your sanctuary, you create the conditions necessary for deep psychological integration. You remove the noise, the opinions, the projections of others, and begin to hear your own voice clearly. In this space, the unconscious rises to the surface. Hidden patterns reveal themselves. The pain you've tried to share with others begins to speak in a new language. Not of complaint or emotional outburst, but of insight and clarity. It is only in solitude that you can begin to discern the structure of your inner world, to map its contours, and to meet parts of yourself that have long been exiled from your awareness. The modern mind is conditioned to avoid stillness. People distract themselves endlessly with conversation, entertainment, social media, work, or relationships, not because they are always busy, but because they are afraid of what will surface when the distractions fade. The fear of solitude is at its core, the fear of meeting the shadow, the rejected, hidden, and often painful parts of the psyche. These are the wounds that never healed, the beliefs that formed in times of trauma, the truths we do not want to face. But without facing them, we remain fragmented. We live in pieces. We repeat cycles, not because we are cursed, but because we refuse to listen to the parts of us that hold the wisdom for our healing. Solitude offers no one else to blame, no one else to distract, and no one else to perform for. It leaves only you and the truth you have been avoiding. There is also a strength that comes from solitude that cannot be gained any other way. When you sit with your pain without trying to silence it or escape it, you begin to transform. The very act of not running becomes a form of power. You develop emotional endurance. You become less reactive, more grounded, more self-aware. You stop needing others to mirror your worth because you begin to see it reflected within. This kind of inner stability is not built in conversations or crowds. It is built in quiet moments of confrontation, reflection, and surrender. You learn to become your own witness, your own healer, your own guide. This is the beginning of individuation, the psychological process of becoming whole, and it cannot happen in noise or independency. It happens in solitude, where the soul finally has the space to speak. Making solitude a sanctuary also changes the way you relate to others. When you no longer need others to carry your emotions, validate your worth, or fix your pain, you begin to engage with them from a place of authenticity rather than need. Relationships become richer, clearer, and more balanced. You stop projecting your unresolved emotions onto others because you've taken the time to understand and own them. You stop expecting others to complete you because you've already started the work of completing yourself. Solitude teaches you the most essential truth, that you are responsible for your own inner state, that no one else can walk into the depths of your being and make sense of your chaos. Only you can do that. And when you do, you emerge not empty or broken, but filled with a quiet confidence that comes from having truly met yourself. The journey inward can feel intimidating at first. The silence can seem overwhelming. The emotions that surface may be painful, confusing, or deeply uncomfortable, but beneath that discomfort lies transformation. Solitude strips away illusions and invites you into intimacy with your own soul. It is here, in the sanctuary of aloneness, that healing begins, not as an external event, but as an internal awakening. And conscious that something within you is calling for attention, understanding, and transformation. When people rush to talk about their pain to others, to vent, to complain, to seek validation, they often miss this deeper opportunity. Rather than sitting with the discomfort and learning from it, they project it outward, hoping someone else will help them carry it. But pain if observed with patience and curiosity, begins to reveal its roots. It becomes more than just a feeling, it becomes a pattern, a story, a set of beliefs that have shaped how one sees the world and themselves. In this way, pain becomes a doorway. It opens into the depths of the psyche and offers the one who feels it a chance to transform, not by escaping it, but by studying it. The first step in this process is to stop judging pain as something inherently negative. Most people are conditioned to treat emotional suffering as a problem that needs to be fixed immediately. But this mindset creates resistance, and resistance strengthens the very thing one wishes to dissolve. When you pause and allow the pain to exist, without naming it, analyzing it, or rushing to solve it, something begins to shift. The mind quiets, the body listens, and the pain starts to communicate. It shows you its history. It shows you the conditions under which it thrives. It reveals the fears and assumptions that keep it alive. You begin to notice patterns, similar relationships, familiar triggers, repetitive thoughts. This is not coincidence. It is a message from your deeper self asking to be acknowledged. Transforming pain into insight requires a particular kind of attention, one that is neither reactive nor dismissive. It asks you to become an inner observer, to sit quietly within your own suffering and ask it questions. Where did you come from? What do you want me to see? What belief system are you protecting? These questions are not meant to be answered quickly. They are meant to unfold slowly over time as the unconscious reveals its layers. Most people never ask these questions because they are too busy speaking their pain to others, hoping for external comfort. But true comfort doesn't come from being understood by others. It comes from understanding yourself. Pain transforms the moment it is truly seen, not as an enemy, but as a guide. This shift in perspective turns suffering into a form of wisdom. The emotions that once felt unbearable begin to make sense. You realize that anger was covering grief, that fear was born from past betrayal, that loneliness was a cry for self-reconnection. These insights don't come through talking, they come through witnessing. And once you've witnessed your pain with depth and honesty, it no longer controls you. You begin to make new choices. You stop repeating old cycles. You relate to yourself and others from a place of awareness rather than unconscious reaction. This is the essence of inner transformation, not the elimination of pain, but the integration of its message. Most people underestimate their own capacity to hold pain. They believe they need others to carry it for them, to make it go away, to explain it. But the truth is, every person holds within them the strength and intelligence required to understand their own suffering. This capacity is awakened not through external dialogue, but through inner dialogue, through reflection, journaling, solitude, meditation, or even intentional silence. Pain that is studied becomes knowledge, that is embodied becomes wisdom, and wisdom transforms not only how you feel, but how you live. The pain that returns again and again is not punishing you. It is reminding you that something remains unexamined, unacknowledged, or unhealed. To turn that pain into insight, you must stop running from it, stop talking it away, and instead meet it fully. In that meeting, something ancient and powerful awakens, the part of you that knows how to heal. Expecting others to care for your emotional wounds more deeply than you do is a quiet betrayal of your own inner strength. So often, individuals share their suffering with the hope that someone else will see its weight and rush to offer comfort, understanding, or solutions. But this expectation places the burden of healing onto others, which not only overwhelms them, but also keeps the one suffering in a state of passivity. It is not that people are unwilling to care. It is that they cannot care in the precise way you need unless you first show that level of care to yourself. Emotional wounds are not like physical injuries that someone else can treat or bandage. They are personal, deeply internal, shaped by memory, interpretation, and unconscious belief. To expect others to tend to what you yourself ignore is to outsource the most sacred responsibility of self-repair. This unconscious dependency is subtle but powerful. It shows up when you feel bitter that others don't check in on you, or when you feel abandoned because someone failed to offer the level of empathy you silently hoped for. Beneath that frustration is often a truth that has not yet been faced, that you have not fully shown up for yourself. That you continue to speak your pain to others while refusing to sit quietly with it on your own. It is easier to wait for someone to rescue you emotionally than to become your own witness, your own comforter, your own guide. But real healing begins when you turn inward and meet your own emotions with honesty and gentleness. This act of self-care is not indulgence, it is necessity. It is the foundation upon which all other relationships are built. When you consistently look outward for comfort, you slowly weaken your emotional independence. You train yourself to rely on others for validation, perspective, and strength. But what happens when those people aren't available? When they are dealing with their own struggles, when they cannot understand the complexity of your inner experience, you are left feeling empty, unsupported, and more wounded than before. Not because people are cruel, but because the responsibility you placed on them was never theirs to carry. Emotional maturity means learning to hold your own sadness, confusion, and fear without expecting someone else to fix it. It means becoming the container for your own discomfort rather than needing someone else to be that container for you. There is a kind of freedom that emerges when you begin to care for your own wounds. You stop waiting for others to validate your pain. You stop needing others to carry what you can learn to carry yourself. This doesn't mean isolating or rejecting support. It means rebalancing the dynamic, shifting from helplessness to participation. You become an active agent in your own healing rather than a passive recipient of care. And paradoxically, this makes your relationships healthier. When you no longer need others to fix you, you can show up with presence rather than neediness. You can connect from a place of strength rather than desperation. People are more likely to respond to you when you are not demanding their emotional labor, but rather inviting their companionship. Caring for your own wounds also teaches you something essential, that you are capable of healing, that you are not as broken or fragile as you once believed. The process is not easy. It requires sitting in discomfort, asking hard questions, and sometimes grieving what you once refused to feel. But on the other side of that inner work is resilience. You begin to trust yourself. You learn that no matter what happens, you have the capacity to meet it. That trust becomes your foundation. And from there, you stop expecting others to rescue you, not because you don't deserve support, but because you have already begun the sacred work of supporting yourself. ChatGPT said, there is a critical shift in human development that occurs when a person moves from being the victim of their story to becoming its editor. Most people spend a significant portion of their lives reacting to experiences, feeling as though life is something that happens to them rather than something they actively shape. They carry past wounds like invisible weights, repeating the same emotional patterns, telling themselves and others the same narratives of blame, disappointment, and helplessness. In doing so, they reinforce a psychological identity centered around suffering. This identity, though painful, becomes familiar. It defines how they see the world, how they interpret others' actions, and how they view themselves. The victim mindset is not only about external events. It is a lens through which every experience is filtered. But this lens distorts reality. It turns setbacks into proof of unworthiness, relationships into battlegrounds, and life into something to endure rather than shape. The moment a person begins to take authorship of their life story, everything changes. This shift does not require that the past be forgotten or that pain be denied. It requires something more difficult, responsibility. The kind of responsibility that says, I may not have caused all the pain I've experienced, but it is my task to decide what I will do with it. This level of ownership is a psychological turning point. It means stepping out of old narratives that were often inherited, unconsciously formed, or built around trauma. It means choosing to examine the beliefs that have shaped your life and asking whether they are still true, still useful, still worthy of being carried forward. When you become the editor of your story, you begin to cut away what no longer serves your growth. You recognize the chapters that were written by fear, by others' expectations, or by moments of deep pain, and you start to revise. You stop repeating the same lines of self-pity, self-blame, or projection. You begin to write with intention. Every thought, every decision, every emotional response becomes an opportunity to shape a new narrative. This process doesn't happen all at once. Editing your story is not a single act, but a continuous process of awareness, correction, and creation. It's a commitment to staying awake to your own patterns, to challenging your assumptions, and to no longer letting past versions of yourself dictate your future. One of the great myths people carry is that they are bound by their history, that because something painful happened, they are permanently shaped by it. But history is only as powerful as the meaning you give it. Two people can experience similar pain and emerge with completely different stories. One becomes consumed by bitterness, the other fueled by wisdom. The difference lies not in the event, but in the interpretation. The editor knows this. The editor doesn't erase the past, but reframes it. They find lessons in the wounds, strength in the struggle, and direction in the chaos. They do not deny what happened. They assign it a new role in the greater arc of their becoming. Taking control of your story also means confronting the shadow, the parts of yourself you've avoided, denied, or blamed on others. The editor must be honest. They must look at where they contributed to their suffering, where they held on too tightly to being being right where they abandon themselves for approval. This is not self-punishment. It is the path to liberation, because only when you claim the full truth of your experience, both what was done to you and what you did in return, can you begin to write something new. You are not powerless. You were never meant to be a passive character in the unfolding of your own life. Beneath every wound, every limitation, every excuse lies the capacity to create meaning, to shift perspective, to choose again. The pen is in your hand, the story continues, and with each moment of awareness, you write not from habit but from purpose. So stop handing your pain to the world, hoping it will fix what only you can heal. True strength begins when you turn inward, take responsibility for your story, and become the author of your own peace.